If you don't move, we can't close the cabin doors." The words weren't yelled, but they might as well have been. Dr. Solomon Bennett looked up from seat 9C, his hand resting lightly on the armrest. His spine, already aching from the walk down the jet bridge, now stiffened. The flight attendant's name tag read Kayla. Her arms were folded, her tone firm. Just professional enough to sound polite, just cold enough to say, "I don't care." "I booked this seat weeks ago," Solomon said quietly. "I have spinal degeneration. This seat was recommended by my physician." Kayla didn't blink. "I understand, sir, but a mother and her 2 children need to sit together. The only available block of 3 seats is this row." Solomon paused, eyes narrowing just slightly. "I'm not trying to be difficult," he said. Kayla leaned in just enough for only him to hear. "Then please, don't be." A hush fell over the surrounding rows. People turned, phones tilted. The unspoken verdict swept through the cabin. "He's the problem. He's holding us up." Solomon felt it, like static pressure on his skin. Shame, dressed in other people's convenience. He gave a long, quiet sigh. Then, carefully, he reached for the headrest in front of him and pulled himself upright. Each vertebra rebelled. Without protest, without drama, he nodded. "I understand." But someone watching knew this wasn't okay. And 9 minutes later, the airline would realize they'd just made a very, very expensive mistake. "Tell us where you're watching from. And have you ever seen something this wrong?" And no one spoke up. He hadn't told anyone how long it took just to pack that morning. It wasn't the clothes. He'd worn the same navy blazer to every formal event since 2012. It was folding, reaching, bending. Simple movements his spine now treated like negotiations. Dr. Solomon Bennett had learned to move slowly, not out of age, but out of necessity. At 79, he still woke at 5:30, still drank his coffee black, still made the bed with military corners, a habit from his early NASA days when every detail mattered, because people's lives depended on it. Now, it was just him, alone in a quiet home in Palo Alto. He hadn't flown in years, not since the surgery. But when he got the letter, thick cream paper, embossed seal from the Chicago Council on Scientific Progress, he held it for a long time. "You are hereby invited to receive the Lifetime Contribution Award for Applied Physics." He smiled, once, faintly, then circled the date in red ink on the fridge calendar. He didn't care about the applause. He didn't care about the cameras. He just wanted to sit in the same room as the students he had mentored, the colleagues who still remembered what he built. Not for credit, but because it mattered. That's why he booked seat 9C, aisle, premium economy, with just enough space to let him keep his spine straight. It wasn't luxury. It was survival. He had the prescription in his briefcase, folded and notarized. A small piece of dignity in case anyone ever questioned it. When he boarded that morning, he moved slow, deliberate. One hand on the railing, one hand clutching the leather handle of the same suitcase he'd used since '92. The gate agent had smiled. She even offered a pre-board, which he accepted. No one asked who he was, and that was fine. Solomon didn't need to be known. He just didn't want to be erased. That's what made seat 9C matter. It was more than a chair. It was control. It was freedom from the pain that made even short rides feel like a test of endurance. And today, of all days, he'd hoped to get there with a little peace. So when the flight attendant stood over him, asking him to give that up, Solomon had tried. He really had. But there's only so many ways you can explain yourself before it sounds like you're making excuses. Only so many times you can say, "I have a medical reason," before someone stops listening. And now, here he was, squeezed between a teenager in headphones and a man in a rumpled suit tapping away on a laptop, arms spilling into his space like he owned it. Solomon sat back, spine curled slightly, hands folded. No one asked why he looked so tired. No one knew how much it took just to sit still. And no one, not yet, realized exactly who they had just humiliated. 3 rows ahead, a toddler began to cry. The mother looked flustered, trying to calm him while juggling a carry-on and motioning to 2 older kids further back. The cabin hadn't even filled yet, but attention already hung in the air, subtle but sharp. Flight attendant Kayla Bennett moved quickly, her ponytail tight, her eyes scanning her tablet. Her smile looked permanent, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She stopped near row 9, tapped the screen again, frowned, then turned to Solomon. "Excuse me, sir," she said. "You're in 9C?" Solomon nodded. "Yes." She crouched slightly, performing that trained posture of corporate empathy. "There's a family that was split during booking, a mother with 3 small children. This is the only block of seats where they can all sit together." He listened, waited. "My seat was chosen for medical reasons," he said calmly. "I have severe spinal issues. This position lets me sit without pressure on my neck." Kayla's smile held, just, but there was a pause. Then, "We really appreciate your cooperation. It would only be for this flight." Solomon's jaw clenched slightly. "I understand what you're asking, but if I sit anywhere else, especially a middle seat, I risk days of nerve flare-up. I booked early and paid extra." "I do understand, sir," she said, firmer now. "But the family needs to sit together. If we don't resolve this, the cabin doors can't close and we'll miss our departure slot." There it was, the subtle escalation, the framing. You are now the reason this flight might be delayed. And the surrounding passengers? They were listening. One man glanced over his shoulder. Another woman tilted her phone slightly, just enough to see. The shift was invisible, but crushing. Solomon felt the walls closing. He had made his case. Clearly, politely, with a medical note in his bag. Still, Kayla waited. The air felt thinner somehow. "I'm sorry," he said at last, his voice quiet. "But I really can't sit in the back." Her smile thinned. "I need you to cooperate, sir." His heart sank, not at the words, but at the finality of them. She wasn't asking anymore. The toddler whined again. Passengers sighed. The situation had been reframed. A stubborn old man versus a stressed-out mom. No one asked why the airline had overbooked. No one asked why they couldn't offer alternatives. They just looked at Solomon like a problem that wouldn't go away. He nodded once, not in agreement, in surrender. And slowly, painfully, he rose. What hurt most wasn't the ache in his back. It was the quiet sense that his comfort no longer mattered. Not to the airline, not to the crew, not to anyone watching. The middle seat always made him feel smaller. Dr. Solomon Bennett lowered himself slowly into 28E, wedged between a young man in oversized headphones and a businessman with a laptop already open, elbows sprawling beyond his armrest like they belonged there. The moment his back touched the seat, his spine protested, sharp, immediate. He adjusted, shifted left, then right. Nothing helped. The space was too tight, the seat too low. There was no room to stretch his legs, no aisle to lean into, just stillness and ache. He folded his hands in his lap, held them there, his breathing shallow. The overhead light above him flickered once, then died. Perfect. No one around him looked up. No one offered help. No one even saw him. And for a man who had once stood in front of lecture halls full of eager minds, that kind of invisibility was worse than pain. Solomon closed his eyes. He didn't pray. He didn't curse. He simply endured. Somewhere behind him, the family had settled into his original row, chatting softly, clicking seatbelts, passing snacks. Up front, Kayla moved briskly through her pre-flight checks, voice bright as ever. The part where compassion was supposed to go? Gone. No one came back to see if he was okay. No apology, no blanket, just recycled air and the hum of an indifferent cabin. And the worst part? He hadn't expected better. He'd lived long enough to know what happened when you were quiet, old, and inconvenient. You got moved, you got forgotten, you got through it. That was the deal. But 3 rows away, someone had seen it. All of it. And she hadn't looked away. Naomi Lau had boarded quietly, laptop in hand, blazer folded neatly on her arm. She didn't ask for help with her carry-on. She didn't need to. Row 6A, window, business class. From her seat, she could see nearly half the cabin, and that was enough. She hadn't meant to watch, but something about the exchange 3 rows back caught her attention. The man, older, well-dressed, with movements far too careful for someone simply tired. And the flight attendant, young, rehearsed, firm in that particular way that didn't invite discussion. She didn't hear everything, but she didn't need to. It was in the way he stood, the way no one helped, the way his shoulders fell just slightly as he limped down the aisle alone. And when she saw him try to settle into 28E, wincing as he lowered himself between a slouching student and a man too busy to notice anyone existed beside him, she felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. Naomi had sat in too many boardrooms, negotiated too many deals, watched too many systems grind people down to ignore what she'd just witnessed. She opened her phone, not to post, not to rant, but to act. Her message was short. Flight 237, passenger Dr. Solomon Bennett, age late 70s, moved from confirmed seat 9C, aisle, due to cabin crew reassignment. Medical need visibly evident, now seated 28E. Flight attendant Kayla Bennett, immediate review recommended, confirm receipt, escalate. NL, she hit send. It didn't need to go viral, it just needed to reach the right place. And Naomi Lau was Executive Vice President of Strategy at Veritas Capital. The same Veritas Capital currently finalizing a $690 million multi-airline equity merge. The same Veritas Capital that had placed Dr. Malcolm Bennett, yes, that Bennett, as managing partner over the transportation sector. And Naomi didn't need to guess. She knew who Solomon was. She'd seen the name before, on Malcolm's calendar, in boardroom anecdotes. Malcolm never spoke much about his father, but when he did, there was a quiet reverence. He taught physics like it was poetry, he once said. He taught me that brilliance doesn't shout. Naomi looked toward row 28 again. Dr. Solomon Bennett wasn't looking for attention. He was just trying to survive a 5-hour flight without breaking his back. And someone had made that harder, because he was old, polite, and didn't fight back. Naomi didn't smile. She didn't sigh. She simply locked her phone, folded her hands, and turned to look out the window. The plane hadn't taken off yet, but something had already shifted. The boardroom at Veritas Capital sat on the 48th floor of a glass tower in downtown Manhattan. It was nearly noon, and the sun lit up the skyline like polished steel. Inside, the room was colder, sleek, silent, clinical. Malcolm Bennett stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled. Tie loosened just enough to signal confidence without carelessness. He had just wrapped the quarterly check-in with regional asset directors. Aviation portfolios were holding steady. Infrastructure was outperforming projections. The merger of 4 mid-tier airlines was days from public announcement. A $690 million consolidation play that would shift control of 12% of domestic air routes into Veritas's hands. And Malcolm? He was the man behind it all. The closer, the strategist, the voice you called when the system needed fixing, quietly. His phone buzzed once, then again. Malcolm didn't check it immediately. He always finished what he was doing. But as the last director logged off the call and the room emptied, he reached for it. Face recognition unlocked it instantly. One new message. Naomi Lau. Subject, Flight 237, Dr. Solomon Bennett. He didn't sit, just read. Then read it again. And for a moment, everything around him, the skyline, the empty chairs, the charts still glowing on the wall screen, faded. His thumb hovered not over a reply, but over an internal system shortcut. Veritas Ops, Liquidity Command, Aviation Credit Holdings, T237, Freeze pending status. Pre-authorized. Trigger level. Executive override only. He tapped once. Confirmed. Execute. Hold on. 210 Attendant operating credit lines linked to Transstar Airlines. Effective immediately. Reason. Ethical compliance breach under internal review. The confirmation came in under 2 seconds. No alarms, no alerts. Just a quiet change in the flow of capital, enough to grind a machine the size of an airline to a silent, shuddering halt. Malcolm stared at the city, eyes steady, jaw set. He didn't call the CEO of Transstar. Didn't need to. The airline's accounting system would alert them within minutes. Then the operations desk. Then flight control. Then, inevitably, someone on Flight 237 would pick up a phone and realize something had gone wrong. Quietly, systemically, irrevocably. And all of it because someone moved his father out of his seat. He didn't write a statement, he didn't post a tweet, he simply closed his phone, adjusted his sleeves, and walked back into the war room. The storm hadn't begun, but it had been scheduled. The cabin was settling into its pre-flight hum. Seatbelts clicked. Overhead bins slammed shut. The air had that recycled chill, tinged with cleaning spray and faint nerves. Back in 28E, Dr. Solomon Bennett sat still, eyes closed, hands folded in his lap. He looked like a man meditating, but he wasn't. He was managing the pain, one breath at a time. 3 rows ahead, Naomi Lau stared at the screen of her phone. A single checkmark had appeared beneath her message. Delivered. Then, just before the safety demo began, something unusual happened. The cabin lights flickered. Not much. Just a hiccup. The flight attendant call panel over row 1 lit up, then went dark, then lit again. In the cockpit, Captain Aaron Michaels scanned his tablet. A new system alert flashed across the top. Credit hold notification. Flight 237. Immediate financial review flagged by Veritas Capital passenger of interest, Dr. Solomon Bennett. He blinked, then read it again. He recognized the name. Everyone in aviation finance had heard of Malcolm Bennett. And if this was his father, the implications hit like cold water. He reached for the intercom handset. "Kayla," he said evenly, "can you step up to the galley a moment?" Seconds later, the young flight attendant arrived, tablet clutched tightly. "Yes, Captain? Where's the passenger originally seated in 9C? She hesitated. "He was moved to accommodate a family with minors. He's in 28E now." Captain Michaels nodded once. No anger, no theatrics, just command. "You'll return him to 9C immediately." Her mouth opened slightly. "Sir, the family's—" "This isn't a discussion," he said. "This is an operational directive. Now." Kayla froze for a beat, then nodded. "Understood." She turned quickly, walking the narrow aisle back toward coach, heart pounding. Passengers turned their heads, eyes tracking her movement. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly when she reached Solomon. "We'd like to move you back to your original seat." He opened his eyes, slowly, cautiously. "I'm sorry?" he asked, not unkindly. "Your original seat, 9C. We'll escort you now." Around him, the college kid removed his headphones. The businessman stopped typing. The shift was subtle, but real. Solomon hesitated, then began to rise, slower than before. He wasn't sure what was happening, or why, but something had clearly changed. And for the first time in hours, the cabin no longer felt indifferent. It felt like it was holding its breath. The overhead lights dimmed. The cabin hushed. Most passengers thought it was just part of pre-flight protocol, but a few noticed something different. The cockpit door opened, and when Captain Aaron Michaels stepped into the aisle, people looked up. He didn't carry a clipboard, he didn't rush. He walked with calm authority, gold stripes on his sleeves, silver wings over his chest, face unreadable, but focused. Passengers shifted in their seats. Some lowered their phones. Others just watched. He made his way down the aisle, eyes scanning, not for trouble, but for one man. When he reached row 28, he stopped. "Dr. Solomon Bennett?" the captain asked, voice low, deliberate. Solomon, already halfway to standing, looked up, brows knitting slightly in confusion. "Yes?" Captain Michaels offered a small, respectful nod. "On behalf of this crew and this airline, I'd like to apologize, sir. You should not have been moved from your seat." A ripple of silence moved through the surrounding rows. The teenager who had been in headphones now sat straight. The businessman beside them lowered his gaze. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," Solomon said quietly. "You didn't," the captain replied. "We did." He turned toward Kayla, who stood a few feet away, pale and stiff. "Please escort Dr. Bennett back to seat 9C and make sure he's comfortable." Kayla gave a quick nod. Her voice caught somewhere in her throat. "Yes, Captain." The captain looked back to Solomon. "We'll be making a formal report about this incident, but for now, sir, allow me to return your seat and, hopefully, a small measure of the dignity that should never have been taken." Solomon didn't know what to say. He simply nodded, lips parting slightly, but no words coming out. As he moved slowly back up the aisle, passengers turned to watch. Some nodded. One man murmured, "Sir." Another, mid-40s, cap in his hands, gave a subtle salute with 2 fingers to his brow. And Solomon walked through them, not as a man displaced, but as one returned. He reached row 9, and Kayla stepped aside as he lowered himself gently back into his original seat. The headrest still held the crease where he'd first leaned, but the air around it felt different now. Charged. Alive. Captain Michaels gave a final nod. "Thank you, sir." Then he turned and walked back to the cockpit, the aisle parting respectfully as he passed. Solomon sat still for a moment. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. But something in his posture changed. For the first time today, he no longer felt like he was shrinking. Back in 9C, Dr. Solomon Bennett sat quietly. He didn't lean back. Not yet. His hands rested on his knees, shoulders drawn in like they'd forgotten how to relax. His bag, still tucked beneath the seat in front of him, hadn't moved. Everything around him had, but not him. Across the aisle, a man in a gray windbreaker leaned toward his seatmate and whispered, "Did you see the captain?" He saluted him. The seatmate shrugged. "Yeah, I thought that was weird." 3 rows behind, a teenage girl nudged her dad and murmured, "He's gotta be someone. That doesn't happen for just anybody." They were right. But even Solomon didn't know how true that was. In the cockpit, Captain Michaels scanned a second message on his tablet. This one wasn't automated. It came with a human name attached. Malcolm Bennett, Managing Partner, Veritas Capital. Advised freeze request initiated under Passenger Protection Clause. Further instruction pending. The captain blinked once, then tapped to acknowledge. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. Up front, Kayla hadn't spoken since returning to the galley. Her hands clutched the tablet against her chest, lips pressed tight. She was replaying everything, from the first polite request to the final order from the captain. And now, standing still while the plane held position, she was beginning to understand. She had moved the wrong man. Solomon, for his part, still had no idea. He hadn't seen Naomi's message. He hadn't heard about the credit freeze. He didn't know the systems behind this airline were unraveling quietly from the top down. But he felt something in the air, how the glances had shifted, how people who once looked past him now nodded when they passed, how the silence was no longer cold, but full of something else, respect, maybe even regret. In his jacket pocket, his phone buzzed once. A message from Malcolm. Saw the manifest. Saw what happened. Don't worry, Ba. I've got it handled. Love, M. Solomon stared at the message for a moment. He didn't reply. He just turned off the screen, placed both hands gently over his phone, and exhaled. Slow and full. The kind of breath a man takes when the world finally remembers who he is. Tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever seen someone quietly take back their power like this? The plane hadn't even reached cruising altitude when the first ripple hit. At Transtar's corporate headquarters in Atlanta, a blinking alert interrupted the morning analytics dashboard. An account flagged. A freeze request confirmed. $210 million in operating credit. Locked. Then came the follow-up email. Subject line: immediate escalation. Passenger ethics violation. Bennett S. Flight 237. It took less than 5 minutes for the compliance team to realize what had happened. Less than 10 for someone to whisper the name Malcolm Bennett. By noon, the airline's CEO was on the phone with legal. By 2 p.m., the board had called an emergency meeting. They weren't panicking yet, but they were scrambling. And outside that boardroom, the story had already begun to breathe. A photo had surfaced. Captain Michaels, mid-aisle, saluting an elderly man in seat 9C. The image was blurry, snapped by a passenger and posted with no caption. But it didn't need one. The comments came fast. Who is he? Why did the captain salute? Respect. Whatever happened, this was the right move. Local news stations picked it up. Then aviation blogs, then national headlines. They didn't have the full story. Not yet. But they had the mood. And it was shifting. Solomon didn't know any of this yet. He sat calmly as the seatbelt sign switched off, eyes closed, spine straight. But below him, thousands of feet down, the world was moving. Fast. 2 days later, the press release dropped at 9:00 a.m. sharp. It didn't mention names. It didn't reference Flight 237. It didn't need to. The header read, Veritas Capital announces Passenger Honor Index, a new ethical standard for commercial aviation investments. The statement was short, precise. Effective immediately. All current and future recipients of transportation sector funding from Veritas Capital will be subject to PHI compliance. Passenger Honor Index, PHI, is an AI-integrated accountability system that assesses cabin crew conduct through behavioral mapping, pattern recognition, and verified passenger reports. Scoring below compliance threshold will result in restricted access to capital, removal from preferred portfolio status, and mandatory third-party review. The email landed in the inboxes of 14 CEOs before they finished their coffee. By noon, 3 airlines had already requested early access to the framework. By end of week, 7 had signed provisional agreements. Because they all knew one thing. If Veritas pulled funding, they were done. And if Malcolm Bennett had built the system, it wasn't a PR stunt. It was permanent. The press conference later that day was brief. Malcolm stepped up to the podium in a Navy suit, no tie, face calm as always. He didn't smile. "We're not here to punish," he said. "We're here to correct." Reporters leaned forward. This system was created because we saw a pattern, one that favored convenience over respect, policy over basic decency. We're not asking airlines to be perfect, we're asking them to see the people in seat 9C. He paused. Especially when those people have spent a lifetime building the very systems that let that plane fly in the first place. He didn't say his father's name, but he didn't have to. The room held a silence that didn't beg for applause. It simply agreed. Outside, headlines flashed across terminals. Passenger Honor Index, the quiet revolution in the skies. New standard puts power back in passenger hands. Veritas freezes $209, then offers airlines a mirror. Back on the ground in Palo Alto, Solomon Bennett sat on the front porch of his modest home. He hadn't been online. He didn't need to be. His phone had buzzed all morning. Journalists, former students, even a retired senator. He declined every call. Then, just before noon, a white envelope arrived. No logo. Just 2 words typed in simple black font. We remember. Inside, a copy of the PHI report. Attached was a handwritten note. Heard about what happened. Thank you for teaching us how to stand still and still be powerful. A former student, now a CEO. Solomon folded the letter, set it beside his morning coffee, then leaned back in his chair, spine straight, face toward the sun. He didn't say a word, but for the first time in years, he felt seen. The house was quiet that evening. The kind of quiet that didn't press, didn't weigh, just was. Solomon sat by the window in his study, a cup of tea cooling beside him, one hand resting over a thin envelope. The name printed on the return label was understated, Veritas Capital. He hadn't opened it yet. He would. Later. Outside, the last of the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long lines across the carpet, and in the silence, he heard the soft creak of the front door. "Ba?" came a voice. He turned. Malcolm stood in the doorway, suit jacket in one hand, sleeves rolled up, eyes tired, but steady. "I figured I should deliver this one in person," he said, holding out a small box, silver embossed with the Veritas seal. Solomon didn't ask what it was. He just took it, held it for a moment. "I didn't mean to cause a storm," he said gently. Malcolm gave a quiet smile. "You didn't, you just sat down." They didn't speak for a while. They didn't need to. Then Malcolm lowered himself into the chair across from his father, leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You always said dignity wasn't about what people give you," he murmured. "It's about what you refuse to give up." Solomon looked at him, and for the first time since the flight, his eyes softened. "I still believe that," he said. "But sometimes, it helps when someone stands beside you anyway." Malcolm nodded. Outside, the porch light flicked on. The house exhaled into night. And in that moment, quiet, small, unbroadcast, something settled between them. Not victory, not revenge, just the certainty that even in a noisy world, doing the right thing still matters. Even if it starts with nothing more than a man in 9C, sitting quietly, refusing to move, until the whole system has no choice but to move around him. Thank you for watching. Tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moved you, don't forget to share it with someone who needs to be seen.